I have written much about the lives of the Northern Saints. My own life has been nowhere near as eventful. My name is Bede.
Bede was born somewhere on the lands of St. Peter's Monastery in Sunderland, and when he was 7 years old, his family took him to join the monastery. This is St. Peter's, and the area round about it is now known as Monkwearmouth. I wonder if you can guess why. It was built for a monk called Benedict Biscop, who went on to become the first abbot, or first man in charge, and he'd been given the land to build it by the King of Northumbria, and he decided that what he was going to build was a sort of twin monastery with two churches, which are like the ones that he'd seen in France, built not out of wood like churches had been built before, but out of stone. Parts of St. Peter's have been rebuilt, but the place where I am now, the porch and the tower above it, they're both original. So these stones have been here for over 1,300 years. Isn't that amazing? And aren't they beautifully worn and lovely? And I love these carved creatures. They're supposed to be serpents, but they look like elegant swans to me with their long beaks. So anyway, back to Bede. By the time he was 12, Bede had moved a few miles to St. Paul's, the other half of the twin monastery at Gerway, on the banks of the River Tyne. Gerway is called Jarrow nowadays. It's the same name, just a different pronunciation. This is St. Paul's, and this part of it here is over 1,300 years old. Those tiny little windows are Anglo-Saxon. St. Bede would have prayed inside there. Can you imagine that? Oh. And inside, it's got some magnificent Anglo-Saxon bits and pieces. Do you remember I told you that Bede joined the monastery when he was just 7 years old? That means that he left home. He didn't go home in the evening. He didn't even see his family at weekends or on holidays. He left home for good when he was just 7 years old. What must that have felt like? To live in a place which didn't even look like your house, and where the people spoke Latin, which you didn't understand, and to think that you might never see your family again. Why did they do that? Well, we don't know, but we can have a good guess.
There weren't any schools in Anglo-Saxon times.
So the monastery was the only place that boys like Bede could learn how to read and write.
Maybe Bede's family were Christians,
And they wanted him to go to the monastery.
Perhaps they knew that Bede was clever,
and they wanted him to have the chance to learn.
So Bede spent the rest of his life in the twin monasteries of St. Peter's and St. Paul's, and he never did go home. But he loved his life in the monasteries, especially the library, where he read all the books and might even have been the librarian, and the scriptorium, where he wrote his own books. Because he wrote more than 40 books. A lot of them were about the Bible, because he wanted people to understand the Bible. But he was also fascinated by the world around him, and so he wrote books about science. Do you know that he believed that the world was round, just like we do nowadays, and everybody else thought you would fall off the edge if you sailed too far? His most famous book was the first history of Anglo-Saxon England. It was called The Ecclesiastical History of the English People. And he wrote books about the saints as well, and it's a good job he did, because otherwise we wouldn't know much about Cuthbert and Oswald, Aidan, Hild or Wilfred. Bede died here in Jarrow on the 25th of May, 735. He's a rather different saint from the other ones that we've talked about, because he was never an abbot or a bishop. He never founded a monastery. He didn't even seem to go traveling and preaching to people like the others did. But he left a fantastic legacy. He was a wonderful writer, and he shone a light on the Anglo-Saxon world and taught people to be interested and curious about the world round about them. And that's a wonderful lesson to learn from a saint, because if you can't be curious, then the world is a very dull place indeed. At the end of his history book, Bede wrote a few words about himself, so we'll let him finish his story.
I was born on the lands of this monastery, and on reaching 7 years of age, I was entrusted by my family first to the Most Reverend Abbot Benedict, and later to Abbot Chaelfrith for my education. I've spent all the remainder of my life in this monastery and have devoted myself entirely to the study of the Scriptures. And while I have observed the regular discipline and sung the choir offices daily in church, my chief delight has always been in study, teaching, and writing.